Hi everyone, we're here again for a good evening of tea processing. I have only 3 batches to make tonight. It's all from the ancient tea gardens that we own, Nobuwan Garden. This garden seems to... the harvest is quite plentiful on this garden this year, or at least you could say is the good time to harvest, is the bulk of the harvest is coming out on this garden. So I'm quite happy to be back in Jingmai. I was in the city for just 3 days to finish with the journalists and sort up some stuff in our inventory. And it's good to be back in Jingmai, back behind the wok. And so I would like to follow up on a former video I made about using about the water quality and what water is best for brewing tea. And in that video I said that I was surprised that so many people were using tap water to drink the tea, to which I recommended to use bottled water instead. And from the comment section of that YouTube video, it seems that a lot of people were shocked by this recommendation, because bottled waters are notoriously bad for the environment, because the bottles are made of plastic, which requires energy to produce, and then the water has to be transported mostly by truck to the supermarket, and then you have to go to the supermarket and carry it home, and all this work means unnecessary pollution, you could say. And while we've heard about like the uselessness of buying bottled water, so I decided to dedicate about 2 or 3 hours and do further research on this topic, mainly on the internet. And what I found out was very interesting. So thank you very much for being critical of my arguments in these videos in the comment section, because that's when controversy arises, that we have the opportunity to learn new things and confront our ideas, and eventually, hopefully, getting closer to the truth. So here is what I found out. Well, first, it seems that bottled water, particularly in the US, has a bad reputation, and you read on some websites that they claim it's a kind of scam, because a lot of the bottled water is actually tap water, which is put into bottles. And this is something I ignored, because as far as I know, it's not the case in France. I think the water we get is real spring water from actual springs. And so I ignored this fact, and so I was surprised by this. Now, of course, if you're buying tap water put into bottles, that's a bit ridiculous. Secondly, many people mentioned filtering systems as an alternative to bottled water. And this is also an aspect that I'm not too familiar with, because while I was in Europe, I realized that I was always a student, and I've spent most of my adult life in China, actually, outside of being a student. And when you're a student in Europe, you usually get to move every year. Maybe you share a room, you share a flat with classmates, or rent a small studio. And it means that by moving, you're quite restricted in terms of what investments you can put in the room you're in. Okay, so that's one point. And when I started my tea journey, well, I quickly found that tap water was not really ideal, because in my hometown, like in most of Europe, the water is very hard. And at that time, I'm using a Brita filter, like a pitcher filter that's set in a pitcher. Using that kind of filter was quite popular. But I wasn't really satisfied with this solution, because first, the filter is not meant to decarbonate water. It does it a little bit as a side effect, but the main purpose of those filters, which work mostly on activated charcoal and some variations around this, around absorbing molecules and exchanging ions, those filters are meant to filter the potentially harmful particles that you can get in the water. And it seems that the target audience for these products is people who do not trust the safety of the tap water, which I think in Europe and in the US is probably a misplaced mistrust, because water, I think as far as I know, there are very few events in which the water is contaminated and becomes unsafe to drink. But of course, the health market is a huge market, and if you can advertise, if you can tell a story like there are lots of pollutants in the tap water, so buy our filters and you'll get rid of them, it will surely attract an audience which will be much larger than our tea drinking community. The other reason why you might want to use that kind of filter is to eliminate the chlorine in the water. In many cities, they use chlorine in the water to make sure it is safe to drink, to kill the bacteria all along the pipes. Now the problem is, in many cities, the pipes can be quite old, and in some cities they will just clean the water at the water treatment plant, and then assume that the pipes, the water won't get contaminated in the pipes, which probably is true for if you have a good pipe network. But in other cities with potentially older pipes, they prefer to make sure the water gets clean to your tap. And by this, I think the only solution is to use disinfectant like basically bleach water, like chlorine. And this chlorine, some people can be particularly sensitive. Like, for example, I can smell it even in very low concentrations. So for this, the kind of Brita filter, the filter pitcher, will work well. It will filter out the chlorine. But I checked a bit on the internet, some TDS tests, and it seems that it only filters a fraction of the TDS of the minerals in the water, something like 30%, which is definitely not enough if your water is hard. So, sorry, I'm doing a bit of effort here now. So, to filter the water more thoroughly, if you want to really decarbonate the water, well, I mean, if you want to take out the minerals in the water, I think the only option is reverse osmosis. And this is a different filter system, a system that you can set up under your tap. Usually you will have 3 or 4 filters that are connected to each other, and you will have a small tap through which the clean water, so demineralized water, will come out. And I think this is a valid option, an option I didn't consider when I was a student in Europe because I was moving too much, and these systems are a bit expensive for a student. Maybe it's something $300 to $500 for that kind of setup. Now the good advantage with this setup is you can use the filters for a very long time, and so maybe you'll have less issues with the consistency of water. Yeah, because my biggest gripe actually with the Brita filter when I was using it with the pitcher is that when the cartridge is new, you can get actually a pretty good, a pretty soft water, but it will quickly be used up, especially if your water is hard. So probably it will keep filtering all the harmful chemicals in the water, but it won't do a good job at clearing the minerals out of the water. And so I think when you're drinking tea, you want to have a consistent water, because the enjoyment of the tea, I think, is comparing the different teas. And so that's why for me the bottled water option was the best option. Also, a good thing is if you use a reverse osmosis system, you will have pure water, so with zero minerals in it, which will give you quite an aggressive taste. So you can upgrade and actually add an extra unit after the reverse osmosis system, or some units come packaged with that, and you need a remineralization cartridge, which will add mineral after the to the pure water. And so ideally you'd like to have maybe 30 to 50 ppm of minerals in your water. So that can do a good job if you're in your house for a long time and you want to invest in this. Then I searched a bit about the real environmental impact of using bottled water compared, for example, to using other systems. And indeed, so I checked for the life cycle assessments. So that's quite the advanced study from that includes really all the processes, all what's required to create that bottle of water, to move it, and then how it's disposed of, whether it's recycled or not, things like that. And so I found some studies on the bottled water, but the conclusions were, well, I didn't find really good quality studies, at least not in that 2 hours that I dedicated to the research. Well, one of the studies at least concluded that it really depends on whether the bottles are recycled or not. Because if the bottles are recycled, then apparently, according to the studies, it wouldn't be as polluting as using the pitcher filter system and changing the cartridges, which are also made of plastic and everything. Because of course a bottle of water is not that much plastic, it's about 10 grams of plastic, and then there are different kinds of plastics which have different impacts on the environment. Some are biodegradable, some are not, and then it will depend on whether the plastic is recycled or whether it's incinerated, in which case you can at least recycle the energy, because plastic burns just like petrol. Or in the worst case, if it's put in a landfill, and then it will have a high impact because, well, depending on the plastic, if it's not biodegradable, it will stay in the soil and potentially leach some bad chemicals. So it depends on a lot of factors, and of course I would say it also depends on the proximity to the source of water. I saw some crazy things in China, for example, in the luxury hotels, in the hotel rooms, you can drink French water for like $10 a bottle, you can enjoy a French water in China. Of course, that's ridiculous, and that's pure luxury, and it's definitely a waste of resource. Now, I thought that for such a short time assessment of only 2 hours, going through the life cycle, studying the life cycle assessment was a bit complicated. It's something I surveyed at university, but it's quite a complex approach, which gives you the impact on different things. Often we think of the impact in terms of CO2 emission or equivalent, but there's also the problem of loss of biodiversity, water pollution, chemical pollution in the soil, eutrophisation. So this is quite complex, but this is something I recommend if you want to check the real environmental impact of something. Check the LCA life cycle assessment in Google Scholar. That's usually how the studies are made. But I ran out of time for this research, so I switched to a simpler approach and just checked the carbon. Just checked the carbon consumption, the impact on the impact on global warming in equivalent carbon, and I found that a bottle of water in Europe is on average 163 grams of CO2 equivalent. And so a quick calculation, if you're you could say a serious tea drinker and you have 1 bottle of water, so 1.5 liter of water every day, that will amount to 60 kilograms of carbon equivalent per year. In comparison, 1 kilogram of beef makes 100 kilograms of carbon equivalent. It's particularly high mainly because of the methane which the cows release and when they burp, and this is a very highly methane has a high impact on the global warming, and just because the greenhouse effect is much higher with the methane release. And so if you want to for example, if you choose the bottled water approach, but you're still conscious about the environment, well, one solution to kind of offset your emissions would be to consume about 600 grams less of beef per year. Okay, so if you put that in perspective, it's still not that much. Now, of course, you could argue that this is a kind of fallacy that I'm giving, because you could as well both eat less beef and not use bottled water, and the result would be even better. But then you have to balance, I guess, the pleasure you have of having good water for your tea. This is releasing 60 kilogram of CO2. An average American releases 15 tons, so 15,000 kilograms of carbon equivalent every year, and an average European would be more around 8. So that puts things in perspective when it comes to using bottled water. But then, if you're determined not to use bottled water, at least I would recommend to get a good filtration system. And by that I mean not a pitcher filter, because those really are not designed to remove the minerals from the water. During my tour to Europe, I met some people who worked in some big tea companies, especially in Hamburg and Berlin, and apparently they have a very advanced reverse osmosis and remineralization system in their office, in which they can even tweak the remineralization. So it could be something even better really than bottled water for the tea enthusiast, because then you could get to play with I don't know, with the pH, with what kind of minerals you release in the water, and that would probably open a new a new rabbit hole in your tea drinking journey. So yeah, that's about what I wanted to say. And thank you very much for being critical of my arguments, because it's really important, and without your criticisms I wouldn't have checked more into that water business and things, and thanks to you now I have learned more, even if it's like 2 or 3 hours is a very short time to learn about these topics. At least I have a survey idea of the question. And to finish, I would like to say a word maybe about the dangers of wanting to do good for the environment at the detriment actually of the environment. The problem is often we want, of course, we all want to live in a good environment, and we want to be ethical, and we want to do good. So we hear things like this, and the problem is often the highest sources of pollution, it's very hard for us to avoid them. Like, for example, taking the plane for some trips, or driving your car to work every day, or some sacrifices may be too big. For example, eating less meat is very hard for people, because meat tastes good. And well, just the same, the bottled water, at least to me, tastes much better when I'm drinking tea. And that's where, if you're a bit utilitarian, I guess you have to find the pleasure. This is pollution ratio for the actions you do. And a danger in this is that sometimes it's been proven that teaching little things to protect the planet can have a negative effect, because then people, for example, in France, like 10 years ago, they would say, oh, well, when you brush your teeth, just shut the tap while you're brushing your teeth, things like that. And so people would do that, and then they will feel that they're doing good for the environment. But actually the real savings are really minimal. And since they are feeling good, they feel like they are doing good for the environment, they might allow themselves to do other things. For example, taking a trip, because they will think, oh, all the year I just shut the tap, or I take a shower instead of a bath, so I'm a good person and I can allow myself a trip to Thailand, for example. And the problem is, when you do the calculation, those things are totally incomparable in terms of waste. And unfortunately, it seems that the richer we are and the more we pollute, and I think that that's something that developed countries are really struggling with, is how to preserve a good lifestyle while being maybe less damaging of the environment. And I think to that the response would be maybe spend your money in immaterial things like art, or like a good tea. Actually, when you buy an expensive tea, you could say it has usually a lower impact on the environment than when you're buying tea from conventional plantations, which would be cheaper. But again, those questions are quite hard. You need to do the calculation, like the life cycle assessment, because, for example, you could argue that a Lipton plantation uses maybe more pesticides and generally is more damaging to the biodiversity. But on the other hand, it's shipped in bulk across the world, so you have huge economies of scale on the transportation, while when you order a tea from our shop, well, the parcels are flown from China to your home, and in this process, usually the most polluting step will be just the postman driving to your home to deliver the parcel. It's usually the last kilometers which are the most impactful, because economies of scales matter a lot. And well, for example, if it comes to buying bottled water, you could imagine that if you're buying your bottled water while doing the groceries, then it won't add that much impact. But of course, if you drive to the supermarket specifically to buy bottled water, then of course the impact will go through the roof. So it's a very interesting question, because I feel I really want to maybe do my part to help us have a better planet. And well, I hope at least that my work of promotion of forest tea, like growing tea in a highly biodiverse environment, I hope that work will offset any guilty pleasures I might I might allow myself, right? And finally, yeah, regarding regarding whether it's better to have drinkable tap water or have a delivery of water at home, like have people buying bottled water, again, it's not that simple, because, for example, in China, you have a developed infrastructure, and the tap water is not safe to drink, although sometimes I drink it without problem. But also, people rarely buy bottled water in China because they are delivered in hard plastic containers, and so those containers are refilled. And so it'd be interesting to compare the environmental impact of that water compared to using tap water, compared to making the water safe to drink at the water treatment station level. But for example, in India, when I was in India, we would always buy bottled water and then just throw them in the street because there's no other place to throw it. So if you have a bad garbage collection system, then of course the impact on the environment will be much higher. So yeah, when talking about the environmental impact, it really gets very complex quickly. But I'll be happy to discuss this further, actually, in the comment section. Sorry, I haven't had time to really address the comments in the former videos because I was very busy. But I will either reply to the comments in this video or make some further videos about the topic. And now my tea is almost ready. It was a really good session because it took me a while to do the setup here, and during this time the fire, like the wood, burned, and I had lots of embers when I started. The hot was pretty well, the wok was very hot at the start, and now I'm just running on embers, which I think is the best, because I can allow a slow end to the session. And that will be it. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and see you later. Bye bye.